Well, we could talk about 100 things, but what I really want to zero in on for this conversation is that the Reliability Leadership Foundation that you and Joseph Barber coordinate together have just released the Uptime Elements Internet of Things or IoT Implementation Guide. My question is, we already had digitalization IoT passport as the body of knowledge. Why the implementation guide, and what is the IoT implementation guide?
So when we put out the passport for the IoT domain, we got out the understanding of what and how we can see and view the IoT and technology to support the uptime elements. After we started getting that out, the questions we started receiving as a consortium, the voice of the community was telling us, okay, how do I manage to get this done? How do I make this real? So we decided to take that and focus that more on, if I was Brendon Russ at my company, how would I be able to be a project manager to actively institute an IoT system or solution? So we started to look at, okay, what are those types of things that we need to look at for a successful IoT project? Well, being reliability engineers and kind of those types of nerds that we are, we said, okay, let's go out in the industry and understand what's going on. So we started to look at IoT implementations around the world and found that about 70% of them fail. And when we say failure, we mean they're not sustainable. We don't mean just they failed to get off the ground, but after a year or two, they're completely defunct, no longer utilized. So we started to look at and do RCAs. Why? And then we simplified why, maybe a little bit deeper, but then we started to articulate, okay, these things are what we found and those that fail.
RCA of the project.
RCA of the project, right? And then we started to look at those 30% that are still around, are still kicking, providing the value, or if not, more value than it was ever anticipated. And we started to go through and make those evaluations and start to articulate the things that make them successful versus the things that actually led to their failure. And then thus, we had to do an FMEA and try to build out from that information, what are all the things that could be anticipated? And we started to articulate what are the types of activities or pieces of information or things to consider when you're actually trying to do an IoT project that you may want to make sure does to get yourself the best chance of success as we've found it.
Excellent. Did you say that you discovered what was successful, but you also focused in on what was unsuccessful, the failure, so to speak? Did you include failure stories?
Yes, so failure's always been the most instructional teacher I've ever known. And for us, I fervently believe in the Tales from the Shop methodology is you need to share the horror stories as much as the success. So we actually went through and discussed all those failure modes. So when we're trying to give that guidance of, hey, please try to make sure that you're including some sort of provision or keep this in mind, well, here's a story of how that tripped somebody up, right? This is how this could lead to a real problem for your project, or if not, an outright failure. So we would try to make sure to incorporate that as much as possible, because somebody just saying how successful it is never going to be as impactful, saying like, this stopped me from achieving my goal.
I think it's a great strategy because everybody likes to look at the car crash on the side of the road, when you're hung up in traffic, and nobody just keeps their eyes forward. So I think it's a very powerful teaching method.
A little Schadenfreude never hurt anybody. The idea of making sure that you have standards in place, that you have people that are looking at the data itself, that we all have agreements of what that data is and how it looks like, are becoming a lot easier because integration of services and technologies are synonymous these days. Like being here at IMC, you can't help but go into the expo hall and hear that. And it's not something like, oh, for advanced functionality. No, just turning on the box, you need it. So when we start to talk about that data strategy and that data protocol, that's just becoming part of the conversation now, which is, from our perspective at the consortium, we're so happy to hear that because it's not another thing we have to try to convince people. So once we understand that, then the utilization of that data through the technology, be it AI or whatever other particular applications we're looking for, that just becomes a natural extension then. And it's not something that becomes weird or frustrating. It's because they've already had this conversation a couple of times just in the matter of doing business.
Now, I know you're like me. You weren't on the People and Culture at Work Consortium. But now they've produced a passport in the same mold that the IoT produced a passport. Is there any connection between people and culture at work and IoT?
Absolutely. People get really interested in wanting to make sure that they're involved in something. They want to, the most engaged people are the most efficient people. They're the most productive people. When you start bringing up the IoT these days, everybody has the same fear that people did back in the 70s about automation. And you have to be able to engage them and say, like, nothing's going to end, things will simply change. And this is going to make your jobs easier. You can focus on other ideas and other things. In fact, we want your input to help make that happen. You lend us your voice. So those concepts in the people and culture at work domain, we can certainly leverage them and want them as part of that conversation. The people are always going to be necessary for any of these systems. The amount of technology that we have today still requires people and processes to really make it impactful and powerful. Otherwise, we spend a lot of time and energy on something that's never going to be utilized.
If I'm giving, what do I get?
Well, the first thing is you're lending your voice. And there's a certain amount of recognition that goes for that, but there's that intrinsic benefit that I'm giving back my experience to the actual community. Being able to say that I'm putting this forth and putting this out into the world, something that was not there before. And being able to do that, such that get that word of mouth, it increases your own knowledge because now you're dealing with a lot of other people that are subject matter experts also in this field. You learn more from the other people in the group than sometimes what you're trying to bring in. And that's always the most enriching thing for the group because now we have this rousing discussion of like-minded people all devoted to the same activity.